The 5:30 morning air in southeast Texas was heavy with the familiar scent of sulfur and humidity, a thick blanket that settled over the flat landscape of Beaumont. I sat in the cab of my pickup truck in the gravel parking lot of a local diner, holding a hot sausage biscuit wrapped in greasy paper and staring at the glowing screen of my phone. It was mid-October, and the sky was beginning its rapid transition from a deep, ink-black darkness to a vibrant orange and pink, a process that usually took about 18 minutes. For a brief moment, that sunrise could make a man forget he was parked in the shadow of massive petrochemical plants. Inside the diner, the neon sign flickered, and the low chatter of oil field workers and plant operators talking about their shifts drifted out into the cool morning air. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with my daughter Sarah's name. I answered, and her warm voice filled the cab, asking if I had remembered our plans for her birthday dinner that upcoming Saturday. I assured her that I had it marked on my calendar, and she laughed, warning me that if I missed it, my wife would never let me hear the end of it. We said our goodbyes, and I finished my breakfast before putting the truck in gear and driving toward the massive industrial complex of Coastal Meridian Petrochemical. I had been the senior safety systems engineer at Coastal Meridian for exactly 30 years. Before taking this position, I had spent 6 years working at the Sabine Pass refinery, a facility that had long since been shut down and dismantled. During my early days at Sabine Pass, a major near-miss incident had occurred, involving a rupture of a cooling pipe that almost triggered a fatal thermal runaway. It was only prevented because a senior engineer had physically verified a manual bypass valve that was mislabeled on the control room screen. That event shaped my entire career philosophy. In the field, you must trust the physical reality, not just the computer screen. Over those 3 decades, I had developed an understanding of pressure vessels, piping networks, and control loops that was almost instinctual. I could look at a piping diagram or walk through a processing unit and tell you exactly where the stress points were, what repairs had been made 20 years ago, and why a particular valve was prone to sticking in wet weather. My department was small, consisting of myself and 3 other process safety engineers whom I had personally trained over the years: Keith, Derek, and Gregory. Keith had been with me for 15 years, Derek for 9 years, and Gregory for 4 years. Together, we were responsible for maintaining the process safety management program for the entire 850-acre facility. It was a massive network of high-pressure reactors, distillation towers, storage tanks, and interconnected chemical lines that handled volatile hydrocarbons every hour of the day. Our daily responsibilities were governed by federal regulations, specifically the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Standard 10. This regulation mandated strict process safety compliance for process safety management of highly hazardous chemicals. We managed the inspection schedules for hundreds of pressure vessels, wrote the management of change documentation, oversaw pre-startup safety reviews, and certified the emergency shutdown systems. If we did our jobs correctly, nothing happened. The plant operated quietly, the community remained safe, and the shareholders received their dividends. It was a silent, thankless task, but we took pride in it. We knew that in a petrochemical plant, a failure in process safety did not just mean a loss of revenue. It meant catastrophic explosions, environmental disasters, and lives lost. We spent our days inspecting welds, verifying valve ratings, and ensuring that any modification to the facility followed the strict regulatory guidelines. Every Monday morning, my team sat around a metal table with blueprints, drinking strong coffee and mapping out our weekly inspections to keep the plant compliant. In August, the corporate office in Houston sent us a new vice president of operations. His name was Logan Campbell. He was 30 years old, dressed in tailored suits that looked out of place in a refinery, and carried himself with an aggressive self-assurance that immediately rubbed the plant staff the wrong way. Within the first 4 minutes of our introductory meeting, he managed to mention that he held a Master of Business Administration degree from a prestigious university in the Northeast. Logan had spent the previous 9 years working in operational restructuring for a consumer packaged goods company, a corporation that manufactured laundry detergents and paper towels. He had no background in heavy chemical manufacturing, yet he arrived with a clear mandate from the executive board: reduce operational overhead across the facility by 17% before the fiscal year concluded. The pressure to cut costs was driven by a larger corporate objective. Coastal Meridian's parent company was in advanced, confidential negotiations to be acquired by a massive European energy conglomerate. The deal was valued at approximately $405 million. Every executive in Houston was desperate to present a lean, highly profitable balance sheet to the buyers, and Logan was their chosen instrument to achieve those cuts. He walked the refinery floors with a digital tablet and an administrative assistant, asking department heads to justify their staffing levels. When he finally scheduled a meeting with me, he sat in my small office, which was crammed with reference manuals and safety logs dating back to 1975, and looked at my team of 4 with open skepticism. He asked me what physical product my department actually produced. I explained that we did not produce chemicals. We prevented the facility from exploding. He nodded, wrote something on his tablet, and left. 2 weeks after our initial meeting, Logan Campbell returned to my office to announce his restructuring plan. He informed me that my department was being downsized. The 3 engineers who worked under me, Keith, Derek, and Gregory, were to be reassigned to general maintenance roles or laid off, and their administrative duties would be absorbed by the general operations pool. I would remain as the sole process safety engineer for the entire 850-acre plant. Logan framed this decision as a strategic optimization that would save the company $127,000 annually in payroll costs. I looked at him, stunned by his ignorance, and asked if he understood the requirements of Standard 1910.119. I explained that a single engineer could not physically perform the mandatory inspections, manage the documentation, and oversee the pre-startup safety reviews for a facility of this size. I warned him that cutting the safety team would leave the company exposed to severe federal violations and catastrophic operational risks. I described the 6 unclosed management of change records in detail, explaining that one of them involved a critical modification of the catalyst feed line on the fluid catalytic cracking unit. The operations team had replaced a high-pressure control valve with a different model without completing the required engineering analysis. I explained the metallurgy of the valve, emphasizing that the valve body must be constructed of high-grade chrome moly steel to handle high-temperature corrosive hydrocarbons. The operations team, in their haste, had substituted a cheap carbon steel valve from the warehouse stock. This valve would inevitably fail from sulfidic corrosion in less than a year, resulting in a catastrophic release. Logan smiled condescendingly and told me that he appreciated my perspective, but added that change was often difficult for employees who had been in one place for too long. He assured me that the safety functions could easily be handled through automated tracking systems and general operations personnel. It was clear that he had no interest in the realities of chemical safety. He only cared about the savings on his spreadsheet. He told me that we needed to run the facility like a modern business, not a historical museum. I thanked him for his time, realizing that my position had become untenable. My 3 engineers, one of whom had been with me for 15 years, another for 9 years, and the youngest for 4 years, were handed their termination packages by the end of September. The burden of managing the entire safety program now fell squarely on my shoulders. I was expected to monitor thousands of valves, review dozens of engineering modifications, and keep up with regulatory filings all by myself, which was a physical impossibility. I talked to my wife that night on our back porch as we sat in the evening breeze. I explained that if I stayed under these conditions, I would be held personally responsible for any major incident. Corporate lawyers would protect the executives, and I could face personal criminal liability under federal environmental laws. I could not put my reputation and our family's financial security on the line for Logan's spreadsheet. My wife agreed completely, telling me that no job was worth my peace of mind or my freedom. Instead of trying to perform the work of 4 people, I spent the next 3 weeks preparing my exit. I drafted a formal resignation letter giving 45 days of notice as required by my contract. I did not write a dramatic farewell email or request an exit interview. Instead, I focused on creating an airtight paper trail. I compiled a detailed transition binder, listing every pending regulatory requirement, every overdue mechanical integrity inspection, and every incomplete management of change review. I documented 16 open inspection items that had already passed their federal completion dates. I also flagged the 6 management of change records, where physical modifications had been made to the piping systems without the required safety reviews being finalized. I noted 3 critical pre-startup safety reviews that were scheduled for the upcoming months and required certified engineerings. I placed this comprehensive binder in a bright green folder on the corner of my desk. I then sent a detailed email to my direct supervisor, copying Logan, outlining the specific regulatory deadlines that would occur in 80, 120, and 240 days. I warned them in writing that failing to address these items would place the facility in direct violation of federal safety standards and the Clean Air Act. Logan did not reply to the email, and my supervisor merely acknowledged receipt. During my final 45 days, I worked my scheduled hours, closed out the minor tasks I could finish alone, and refused to sign off on any safety documentation that lacked proper field verification. On my last Friday, I packed my personal belongings, walked out to my truck, and drove home. I stopped at a gas station to buy a bottle of water, watching the distant refinery flares burn against the twilight. The next evening, I celebrated Sarah's birthday at a seafood restaurant, determined to leave the stress of Coastal Meridian behind. For the first 9 weeks after leaving Coastal Meridian, I focused entirely on my personal life. I repaired the wooden fence in my backyard, digging post holes by hand and selecting treated cedar pickets to withstand the heavy Gulf Coast storms. I mixed the concrete in a wheelbarrow under the warm Texas sun, feeling the physical tiredness in my muscles that always brought a deep, satisfying sleep at night. Every morning I woke up without an alarm, enjoying the simple pleasure of drinking black coffee on the back porch while watching the birds and enjoying the quiet. I spent hours working in my small backyard garden, weeding the flower beds, planting fresh herbs, and pruning the pecan trees. I also spent time washing and detailing my pickup truck, a task that I had neglected for months due to the long hours at the plant. In the afternoons, I would walk down to the local park or visit a nearby hardware store, chatting with other retirees about local news. The constant hum of anxiety that had lived in the back of my mind for 3 decades was slowly dissipating. My wife and I even began planning a longer road trip to the Pacific Northwest, something we had talked about for years but could never schedule because of my constant on-call status at the plant. I read 3 novels that had sat on my bookshelf for years, beginning with a detailed historical biography of Ulysses S. Grant that detailed his careful logistics planning. I also read a book about the construction of the Panama Canal and a classic novel about 19th century naval warfare. I took my wife on a long weekend trip to the Texas Hill Country, enjoying the quiet streets of Fredericksburg, eating fresh peach cobbler, and watching the sunset over the rolling hills. My brother called me from West Texas, and we spent hours talking about the old days in the oil fields. For the first time in 30 years, my phone did not ring in the middle of the night with emergency alerts beseech from the refinery control room. My wife commented that I seemed more relaxed and present than I had been in decades. I was beginning to enjoy the quiet routine of retirement, believing that my time at the petrochemical plant was a closed chapter. However, the corporate machinery at Coastal Meridian was moving toward a crisis. The acquisition process was progressing, and the European buyers, a prominent Dutch energy conglomerate with operations in 18 countries, had initiated their final due diligence phase. In November, they dispatched an inspection team to Houston to review the facility's compliance records. The team was led by Martin de Groot, a senior industrial safety auditor with 35 years of experience inspecting chemical plants across the globe. Martin was a meticulous man of 62 with sharp blue eyes who took federal regulations very seriously. He came from a family of engineers in Rotterdam, and he had spent his career auditing heavy industrial sites in Europe, Asia, and South America. He had a reputation in the industry for being entirely unyielding when it came to safety standards. He had seen the devastating consequences of corporate cost-cutting in plants from Rotterdam to Singapore, and he believed that a single overlooked valve could cost human lives. When Logan Campbell tried to present him with color-coded charts and summaries of their new streamlined operations, Martin politely but firmly pushed the tablet aside. He insisted on seeing the raw inspection files, the certification stamps, and the original pressure vessel testing reports. He wanted to verify that every single piece of equipment had been physically inspected by a qualified engineer, refusing to accept any secondary reports or electronic signatures that lacked proper field documentation. He ignored the comfortable conference rooms and spent his days in the records office, wearing standard flame-resistant clothing and steel-toed boots, eager to walk the units himself. He walked through the facility with a thermal imaging camera, inspecting flanges and checking for hydrocarbon leaks that the operators had missed. Martin began his audit by reviewing the process safety management files under Standard 1910.119. It did not take him long to realize that the plant's safety documentation was in complete disarray. As he went through the records, he discovered the 16 open inspection items that had bypassed their mandatory completion dates. Many of these involved mechanical integrity tests on old high-pressure vessels that required ultrasonic thickness measurements to detect internal corrosion. He found the 6 management of change records where physical piping modifications had been implemented on active production units, without any formal safety review or engineering sign-off. The physical piping configuration on the fluid catalytic cracking unit did not match the drawings in the control room, creating a massive hazard. Operating a high-pressure chemical reactor with outdated piping drawings was not only a violation of federal law, but it was also incredibly dangerous for the operators working in the unit. If an emergency occurred, the operators would rely on the drawings to isolate the lines, and any discrepancy could lead to a fatal error. Even more alarming, he identified 3 pre-startup safety reviews for recently restarted process units that had been signed by operations managers who lacked the legal engineering certifications required by federal law. One of the documents had been signed by an administrative logistic coordinator who had no engineering background. Martin spent hours cross-referencing the maintenance logs with the physical installations, finding more and more examples of neglected inspections and unauthorized modifications. He documented every single deficiency in his leather-bound notebook, noting that the plant's management had prioritized short-term operational savings over basic regulatory compliance. He compiled his findings into a formal report and scheduled an emergency meeting with the executive board. The meeting took place in the main conference room of Coastal Meridian's corporate office, a room with leather chairs, a long mahogany table, and large glass windows overlooking the Houston shipping channel. Carl, our chief executive officer, was a man in his late 50s who had spent his career managing balance sheets and was desperate for the deal to close, as his stock options and retirement package were tied to the transaction. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, his hands shaking slightly. Logan Campbell sat next to him, wearing a new navy blue suit, attempting to look composed but rapidly tapping his leather shoes under the table. Martin de Groot sat at the center of the table, flanked by the buyer's legal counsel and a senior financial analyst. Martin sat opposite them, looking calm and cold, drinking a cup of unsweetened black tea. Martin did not raise his voice. He simply opened his folder and laid out the documentation. He pointed to the 16 overdue inspections, the 6 incomplete management of change records, and the 3 invalid pre-startup safety reviews. He then looked directly at the chief executive officer and asked a single question. Who is Raymond Vance, and why is he no longer managing these safety systems? Logan Campbell immediately spoke up, attempting to downplay the situation and protect his restructuring program. He explained that my departure was part of a strategic restructuring to optimize operational costs, which had successfully saved the company $127,000. He assured the audit team that the safety responsibilities had been distributed among the general operations staff using their new agile management platform. Logan tried to use corporate terminology, We have implemented an agile operations framework where our field supervisors assume process safety responsibilities. This has optimized our workflow and allowed us to eliminate administrative overhead, leading to a direct savings of $127,000. Martin listened patiently, then asked Logan to show him the documented certifications of the operations staff who had signed the pre-startup safety reviews. Logan could not produce them. Martin then asked who had authorized the physical modifications to the high-pressure gas lines without completing the management of change process, pointing out that this was a direct violation of Standard 1910.119. Logan began to stammer, stating that they had transitioned to a new operational model and that he would need to review the specific records and follow up. Martin interrupted Logan, explaining that checklists are for grocery shopping, not for pressure vessels holding highly volatile chemical compounds. Martin pointed to the 3 invalid pre-startup safety reviews and explained that Standard 1910.119 requires that these safety sign-offs be executed by a certified engineer who has physically inspected the system. This is a severe regulatory violation that carries civil penalties of up to $15,000 per day per violation and potential criminal liability for the corporate officers who sign the annual compliance statements. Martin closed his folder with a deliberate, quiet finality. He informed the board that his conglomerate could not recommend the acquisition of a chemical facility that operated in violation of federal safety standards. He explained that under United States securities laws and standard acquisition warranties, failing to disclose these safety deficiencies and the elimination of the safety engineering team constituted a material misrepresentation of regulatory compliance. He added that the lack of a certified process safety engineer created an unacceptable legal liability under the Clean Air Act. Martin declared that the $405 million acquisition was suspended immediately. He stated that the transaction was frozen until Coastal Meridian could demonstrate complete regulatory compliance through a comprehensive remediation audit, which they were given 120 days to complete. The corporate executives realized that Logan's savings of $127,000 had blocked a $405 million sale. The CEO was furious, and the fallout was immediate. That afternoon, my former supervisor Frank called me, his voice trembling with anxiety. Frank explained that the CEO was ready to fire Logan, and the board was in a panic. Frank explained that the acquisition had been halted due to safety compliance issues and asked if I would return to the company to manage the remediation. I told him that I would consider it, but only as an independent consultant. I drafted a contract that set my daily consulting rate at more than 4 times my previous salaried wage, which amounted to $3,500 per day. I also included a strict clause stating that I would have final authority over all safety decisions and would not sign off on any system that did not meet federal compliance guidelines. The clause specified that any attempt by the company to override my safety determinations would result in the immediate termination of the contract, with all fees paid in full. The contract also included a comprehensive indemnity clause protecting me from any legal liabilities arising from the plant's pre-existing safety deficiencies. The company signed the contract within 48 hours. I returned to Coastal Meridian the following Wednesday, wearing a visitor badge instead of an employee pass. I walked to my old office, which Logan had partially converted into a storage space for printer paper and cardboard boxes. The door to my office was unlocked, and when I pushed it open, the hinges squeaked loudly. The room was cold and smelled of dust and old cardboard. I had to spend the first hour moving boxes of printer cartridges, broken calculators, and old safety signs that had been piled onto my desk. On the corner of the desk, untouched and covered in a thin layer of dust, was the green transition binder I had left behind. I picked it up, wiped the cover clean, and got to work. I sat in my old leather chair, which squeaked just the same way it had for 30 years. I walked out to the main control room, and the operators on duty shook my hand, expressing relief that someone who knew the plant was back in charge. I had 120 days to correct the violations, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. I spent the next 3 months working systematically through the list of deficiencies. I contacted the certified independent contractors I had worked with for decades, men who trusted my word and adjusted their schedules to help me. Together, we completed the 16 overdue mechanical integrity inspections on the pressure vessels and storage tanks. We spent 3 weeks in the field, performing detailed ultrasonic thickness testing on the reactor walls to ensure they could handle the operating pressures. I spent my nights at the desk, conducting full hazard and operability studies for the 6 management of change records. I reviewed the metallurgy of the catalytic cracking valve, replacing the carbon steel valve with the correct chrome moly valve. I then tackled the 3 invalid pre-startup safety reviews, conducting thorough field verifications of the modified systems before signing the amended certifications under the authority of Standard 1910.119. I worked long hours, but there was a deep satisfaction in doing the work correctly and restoring order to the facility. In March, Martin de Groot and his audit team returned to the facility for a follow-up inspection. We did not sit in the corporate boardroom. We sat in my small office with the reference manuals. Martin read every page of the test reports, checking the contractor certification numbers and the calibration dates of the testing equipment. Martin went through the binders line by line, comparing our engineering logs with the regulatory requirements. He was thorough, but my work was flawless. We spent hours walking the unit pathways to verify the physical installations. We walked out to the fluid catalytic cracking unit, climbing the metal grating steps to the high-pressure valve platform. The wind from the Gulf was strong, carrying the sounds of the operating refinery. Martin reached out with his gloved hand and tapped the solid metal of the new valve. Checking the stamp on the casting, he compared it with the material test report in his hand, looking at the heat number stamped on the metal. He nodded in approval and said that it was a proper chrome moly casting, heat-treated and certified, and that it would handle the sulfur compounds without any issues. He added that this was how a refinery should be managed, and that the plant was fortunate to have me back. We walked back down the stairs, and I felt a deep sense of professional validation. Martin then signed the audit release forms, clearing the way for the acquisition to proceed. The deal officially closed in May at a final price of $421 million, which was higher than the original price because the remediation had resolved all lingering legal liabilities and improved asset reliability. I read about the completion of the transaction in a business journal while sitting on the porch of my home. My consulting contract had ended in April once the remediation was complete. Before I left, I had insisted that the company hire a new safety team consisting of 3 certified engineers, ensuring the facility would never again be left vulnerable. I also heard that Logan Campbell had been quietly transferred to a minor supply chain role at a warehouse in North Dakota, where his only job was tracking inventory of pipe fittings, his career path permanently derailed. On my final evening of consulting, I drove to a scenic overlook that faced the industrial corridor. I watched the orange flames of the flare stacks flicker against the dark Texas sky. The facility was running safely, as it had for most of my 30 years there. I calculated the final cost of Logan's decision. To save $127,000 in annual salaries, the company had paid $54 million in deal delays, consultant fees, contractor invoices, and federal penalties. It was a staggering demonstration of how quickly corporate arrogance can collapse under the weight of regulatory reality. I smiled, put my truck in gear, and drove home to my family,